pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, Marcus.
Morning, how are you, Dave?
Good.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. I'll call to order the Jefferson County Local Development Corporation. This is our Thursday, April 5th meeting. As always, extend privilege of the floor to anyone that wants to speak. We received minutes from our last meeting. Is there any additions and or corrections?
No, sir.
Entertain a motion to,
I'll make a motion to accept as presented.
Second that.
all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Treasurer's report.
6 months in, so everything's kind of halfway there, of course. We're on target, obviously, to break even or do a little bit better with the revenue side. It appears at this point anyway, we're slightly below on the operational expense side. Other things will catch up. Some of the programs are laggards. They haven't spent their committed funds yet, but anyway, I think
Don't encourage them.
Marshall, you're a laggard, spend more. No, as last year, there might be a $10,000 or $15,000 savings, but it was a break-even budget. It probably still is a break-even budget, and may just do a little bit better. That was page 5 of your packet. Page 6, 7, and 8 are just micro views of the programs themselves. Again, they just show you where the ag marketing and operation safety training program are being spent. They're on target to not exceed. Page 9, our balance sheet. We're from prior month, we're down 21,000 on our total current assets. We're about 356,000 lower than where we started at the beginning of the year. Some of that's just moving money around in accounts, but that's the numbers. We're down 52,000 in cash equivalents, and we're up 31,000 in the receivables, and that's where the 21,000 lower number comes from. For total assets, same thing, downward trend of about 23,000. Total liabilities are down 33,000, and the total liabilities in capital, because of what I described earlier, is down about 531,000 from where we were at the start of the year. Page 10 of our program. I had one question on that table, Lyle. The highlight, that value didn't change from the February report. The balance, is that just an error, or is it just the timing of posting the payment?
Timing of the payment.
Okay.
The payment comes into IDA and then it has to be transferred, so.
All the other ones adjusted. That one just didn't change. All right. So that's the treasurer's report. I would make a motion to accept it as presented.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried, thank you. I have no committee reports. Council report? Manufacturing? Okay.
Manufacturing Council met last week, went over some ideas for some programs we want to try to work on. Also, a week ago Monday, I was actually part of a delegation going up to Ottawa with Congressman Stefanik with other economic developers. I can send you some, I'll email y'all, it's sort of a summary of that and some photos, but we met with the chief negotiator for NAFTA, we met with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and members of Parliament along the border provinces. It was interesting getting their perspective on NAFTA and all that's happening in our trade issues right now. And it was just interesting hearing that perspective to kind of we see how things might affect our own companies. And and then just our safety training continues. We're well over 200 attendees so far in the training program. That's for the 2017-2018 program, and we should be hearing by late May how we stand on our funding for next year's program.
Nice.
The evaluations that we get, I mean, SciTech does a great job on that training for us. I mean, we get the evaluations and they're always, I mean, consistently from year to year, just folks appreciate the format, the information they learn, the way the sessions are conducted, and learning from others. So it's very successful.
Great. Questions?
Your visitation with the Canadian folks brings to light to me, I just share it, the fact that I don't know how the general population can assess, you know, do we want to trash NAFTA, do we want to keep NAFTA? The real issues are so hidden and intermasked, and to hear the Canadians' perspective, which is real,
Yeah.
we should take a step back and evaluate where we think we're trying to go.
Yeah, and the supply chains really are interrelated. I mean, you know, and a number of products are manufactured in terms of supply chains, markets, and stuff like that. You know, actually, Marshall and I were up at a conference back in November. I think Marshall Pointer shared with you that Marshall asked a question, and one of the speakers said, well, actually, probably what they're talking about, and that this is several months ago, of course, may hurt the northern border counties in New York and across country more so than in the Canadian provinces. We rely so much on that cross-border trade here. So.
Sure. Marshall, marketing?
Wanted to just mention a couple of things. We had our meeting with Dr. Gardner about strategic plan, and I sent a packet of information over to him, and look forward to working on that project. I'm going to change the how I present to the board from the marketing side a little bit. Got some good feedback from Dr. Gardner about that, and looking forward to it in the future. So, thank you.
Have you seen them come through?
Ag?
Probably just worth sharing. I mean, I think several of you were actually at the Ag conference here a couple, 2 weeks ago already. That Jay coordinated, we hosted, and he did a great job organizing it. Great feedback from the conference, good attendance. Session, you know, attendance varied throughout the day. People came some morning, some were the afternoon, some came and went. But at the peak, we had about 123, was it, Marshall?
Yeah.
I think attendees. So at lunchtime, so the keynote speaker. So good feedback in that, and good attendance and good discussion. John or Ed, anybody, or anybody else was there, wanted to offer anything else they heard?
I think it's good you do it. I compare it to the one last year.
Yeah.
And from an economic, from this agency standpoint, as it ties in with Jay's department and the ag community, it's great. It's keep bringing those out of the box people to the table, because that's what the industry needs.
John, and that just, Jason around that tear sheet ad in that national magazine, it seemed very impressive with the numbers. What did you appear to be? Effective is the wrong word, but also impressive.
Yeah, I thought so. It was interesting about that ag conference. I thought it was a good turn on, or a spin on, to have those educational guys there, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out these millennials and the next Gen X, how you get them into these businesses. What are their quirkiness about things? Because they brought up some pretty interesting discussions there.
John's referencing the FFA
Yeah.
people, education people, schools.
Yeah, you had, yes, South Jeff FFA and Bill Jones
JCC
from
there.
Canton and the JCC.
Jeff Lewis seems fairly strong for FFA.
Yeah. Well, they're in ag country.
Well, yeah, you gotta create training where the businesses and the area that you live.
Good job. What?
I referenced the one, was it last year's session where you brought the guys down from Canada? Here we are fighting NAFTA.
Oh,
And last year's session, you actually had a couple of the people from Ottawa come down and reference some real figures as to trade between the countries that you don't normally see, are exposed to, which I found very enlightening. It really makes you take a step back and say, maybe the Canadians are more right than we are. We better tread lightly.
Strategic planning, Dr. Gardner.
Okay, he's calling Greg.
Greg.
I think everybody got a quick draft. I did meet with Dave and Marshall, and we talked about kind of a way ahead.
recognizing that with Don's heart attack, they're under a lot more pressure and dealing with a lot of other things as well. But we have started the process. I put together, for my part, a very draft bit of analysis. What I'm trying to produce is a fairly digestible document that gives people a background on what's happened in the economy in the last somewhere between 10 and 20 years, depending on what we're looking at. This, I had envisioned a single sheet of paper with some background behind it. Yeah, academics, once we start writing things, they just keep getting longer. So,
Smaller font.
yeah, that's,
Yeah.
that's what my students do.
Maybe
Either
it's
that or
solid
larger
font.
font. if they-
Yeah, larger to
if
get
they
50
run out of-
pages.
If they run out of things to say. What I'm looking to do is a little bit of a search for things that jump out at me as being relevant and important that are probably not obvious without that analysis. But trying to boil it down to something like that gives a picture of what's happened in Jefferson County or in our region in the last 10 to 20 years from an economic standpoint. And I'm really at this point just asking for input, either now or just send me an email about how useful you think this is and areas where I need to add it. You'll see at the bottom of the first page, I want to cover more agriculture, I want to do a little more on manufacturing and tourism, but there may be other industry segments or other measures of economic development besides employment that you'd like me to take a look at. So when you have a chance, just send me some comments on what you think this needs. I'm going to try and summarize without drawing conclusions. I'd rather have everybody arrive at their own individual conclusions. But when I looked at employment as my primary focus on this draft, one of the things that jumped out at me, there hasn't been a great deal of change over time. Which doesn't mean that this organization's been wasting its time, but it does mean that much of what we're doing is probably a cost of doing business. It's difficult to say what things would look like had this organization or its JCLDC, its predecessor, not done what they did. So I'm hoping for our strategic planning and thinking we'll focus not on what we've been doing, but on are there things that we should do in the future that might change this game a bit.
Greg, should we look at population?
We can. Population's another one, somewhere buried in that second bullet under employment. Typically, population over this time period in Jefferson County, civilian population trends downward, slowly and steadily. And it's offset by sudden increases at Fort Drum. So if you wanted, the only thing, if you look at it over the last 20-some years, that really moves the needle on population in this region is big decisions by Fort Drum. You get this big spike in the early 90s when the 10th Mountain Division arrived with families and had that impact. And then there's another one, 2004, 2005, when we got another 5,000 soldiers with the combat brigade. Other than that, the line just bumps along.
Is there an easily obtainable statistic for, I'll call it migratory, if you live in Jefferson County but work in Onondaga County or vice versa? Or is it just it just reports where you work,
Yeah,
not
the
where you
Census
live?
Bureau tends to report where you live.
They do have, can be used when we're doing the economic impact report for Rome. It says like percentage of people that commute out of the county. that
You
kind of
can get some.
But it's
I'm just
some
curious,
generic-
because if there are, it seems like if there's a number of people in Jefferson County, but let's say 10% of that population works in other counties, it would maybe give you a trend that, hey, there are not enough jobs in Jeffco.
That's a
Or
possibility.
vice versa, it could be the other way around.
You can track migration through IRS data, but that shows up when people physically move to a new region. You can see who's leaving, what the in and out migration patterns are, where they're going.
It might be.
All right, I mean, that's, yeah, let me look at that.
I didn't know if that statistic existed. I assumed within this government, any statistic exists if you drill down deep enough.
Sooner or later it does. You run into situations, we're a small region, and so the Census Bureau has some policies of protecting individual data, both of individuals and of businesses. And so if you get down into a real precisely defined piece of an industry, for example, you'll discover that, yeah, we have 3 companies that are in that mix, and with a little bit of statistical attack, you could probably figure out which companies are those numbers and learn things about sales and about employment and so forth. So the Census Bureau will block that sometimes at our level. Then the more detail you want, the longer it takes to get. It's kind of frustrating with agriculture, for example. The U.S. Department of Ag does a really nice agricultural census. Okay, the Census Bureau does it for ag, but ag claims credit and publishes it. They do it on a 5-year basis. The last one that they did was last year, and it'd be great to have that data, but we won't even see top-line data probably till the end of this year, and anything useful for Jefferson County will be months after that. So we're
Greg, on the note under ag, does that mean the 2007 numbers have been escalated to 2012 dollars?
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
I was reading it
Yeah.
literally, but
Yeah.
didn't know if that's what it truly meant.
Yeah, what I did was took the 2007 ag report and then corrected for inflation between 2007 and 2012, so that I could, all the dollar figures in that chart are 2012 dollars. It's not hard to do, so if you'd rather see them all at 2018 dollars, 2017 anyway, I can do that.
Just wanted
So-
to make sure I understood what the note meant.
Yeah, I didn't want to, the Ag Department doesn't, and the Census Bureau doesn't normally provide real numbers. Anytime you hear an economist say real numbers, they mean corrected for inflation. So, just something
So
to
they lost
add.
1% of the farms in numbers, but acreage increased tremendously.
Yeah, and so what's happened is we actually we have fewer but larger farms. The farming is becoming more capital intensive. You know, the labor figures for agriculture have gone up. They're never large. Ag's a difficult thing to get a handle on labor impact sometimes, because if you own your own farm and you work your farm and your family works that farm, they typically don't show up in the same labor numbers that, for example, you would find in manufacturing or something like that. So there's a group of people, if you work on the farm and you get paid to work there, then you show up in one set of numbers. If you own the farm and make a living for your family working that farm, you show up in another set. And they're captured differently and calculated differently. So pointing at the real agricultural impact on employment requires some I'll tell you, creative number crunching. A couple of things to get behind all that smoke and mirrors that I use. The USDA is very skewed, and what really skews this, coming back to Jefferson County, is USDA still uses that barometer of a farm definition being anything that generates $10,000 in sales. Classifies them as a full-time farm. So that's part of the numbers, I think. But with that requirement, a lot of these small backyard farms like to get classified as full-time farm for sales tax exemption. All right. So it shows up in the census. So what it does, when you really amortize all the numbers together, it brings in that pool of really backyard hobby people that I call them large rural residents, not really production agriculture. So it really skews all the numbers downward, which is still relevant, because if you compare it to everybody else across the country, the same thing is going on. But if you wanted to take a hard look, at agriculture in Jefferson County, you kind of need to sort that out. Jay could do that pretty easily. I think the numbers he's got in his office could give you a much clearer picture. And if you wanted to figure
Yeah,
out
good.
employment, forget about all the surveys, from my perspective in the industry. Divvy up the number of cows, you got a good, fairly, all right, divide. I don't care if you're an efficient farm, poorly managed farm, or in the middle farm. It comes, that labor force to take care of those comes back to either 35 to maybe on a good day, 50 cows per man. So I don't care what mode the operation is in, they give you a kind of an employment figure.
How do you get the crop farmers in?
For dairy
How do you deal with
farms.
crop farmers though? I mean, you're dealing with dairy and
Yeah. Well, that's,
livestock.
yeah, that's the.
There's crop farming
Sure.
a little bit too, right?
Sure.
Not much.
Yep, yep, yep.
Greg, are the two values indicative of revenue and cost of goods sold? The value sold per farm and the capital per farm, is that supposed to be like the revenue, cost of goods sold to kind of look at a balance sheet aspect or?
They are, the
other barometers?
capital per farm is a couple of measures, but it's the market value of equipment and other physical
And that's per
assets.
farm, not per acre.
That's per farm.
Which seems like a low number.
It does.
Okay.
And exactly what's in there, and exactly how the USDA calculates that, I'm not sure.
Okay, so
It's the only
that
thing
is not really the cost of goods sold, that's just basically their assets,
Correct,
what they
correct,
own.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. It-
I was trying to figure out if that's sort of like a balance sheet thing
Yeah.
where the difference is,
In this case, it's the USDA's best cut on value of capital assets on the farm. And then the average value sold per farm is market value of agricultural products.
so that's truly revenue,
Yeah.
basically. It's
Yes,
expressed as,
yeah, none of this looks at the profitability of farms. Although that's, I think, possible to come to some average estimates and numbers of that.
Do they have numbers on, you're looking at the value of the assets, do you have the debt that's associated with it? Is there a way?
I didn't run into that on this initial one, but it's something I can look for. So this is
Well, if you
actually.
go to your bankers, file your financial statements every year, and watch trending going on from their benchmark analysis. What surprised me is, a few years ago, the average debt per cow in this industry was hovering around $5,000. Today's figures on the more highly leveraged farms, the debt per cow is approaching $9,000 capital investment for these dairy farms. So you can kind of use that for a barometer too, and recognize that if you're 60% assets to 40% debt, you're getting in a dangerous situation with your banker. So you couple that to adding that additional capitalization to the debt they're carrying, you can get a pretty good
that's the
figure.
debt per cow, but is there corresponding revenue per cow, whether it be milk or livestock?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I think that's kind of what Paul was getting at. I mean, if you look at it as per animal, if it's 9,000 debt, but it might
Yeah.
make 6 or 9, whatever the heck the number is.
Well, we've all heard Jay talk about 6-8 years ago when the milk prices were higher and now they're in the toilet.
Yeah.
And that might be an interesting thing to see how that has changed, the debt per cow or the revenue per cow.
What I'm really hearing you say, I think, is you're looking for some profitability and operating measures for
Yeah.
ag over the time
Might
period.
be good to get with John, Jay, and Ed to kind of
Okay.
get some barometers that would really be expressive of the state of the ag industry.
Well, Farm Credit, being a cooperative bank, land bank, east coast to west coast, they monitor that very closely. They've got benchmarks, they can tell you even in Jefferson County.
So for
That's
our
helpful.
actual strategic thinking, are we taking a look at the different industries that we've worked with over the last, 20 years? And, I think what we need to do, and I'll send you off some of my gray matter back here. I think we need to look at, what we've worked with, what's been you know, the changing, how things have changed and going forward, you know, are we, you know, what kind of industry are we looking to reach out to? We're always there with agriculture, I understand that, I'm just talking about broad range, you know.
I mean, as we look back over, we had an interesting conversation, Dave, Jay, and I, about this agency over the past 20 years or so. I've been one way or another here for about 20 years. Partly on this board and
Yeah.
partly as a consultant and partly as just an engaged citizen. And we chased manufacturing all of that time. We switched, looked into chasing services for quite a while, back office sorts of things with some outcome. Ag, actually, this passed through the board, there's much more of an ag focus this time than there was, I think, the first time I was on the board.
Sure.
And some of that reflects changes in the board's approach as well as, I think, changes in the staff organization. Tourism's always been something we were interested in, but the agency has never really had a lever to pull on tourism. Areas like retail have been low on our priority list. We've been interested in retail as a thing that was happening, but it had not been for many years a strong focus. It just sort of did what it did, and we watched it happen. And I think for many years, a lot of the state funding and the state guidance was not aimed at retail. Retail was seen as an investment that new retailers just moved the dollars around as opposed to bringing in new ones. They just became new mechanisms for us to buy and sell things to ourselves, which I think is a little short-sighted, but. So I've been trying to look at those industries I think that have been most relevant to us as a community economically in terms of job creation. And then, yeah, where I see some that are growing. State, for example, manufacturing in general went through a die-off of jobs in the state for quite a while. Food production is now very clearly the one area of manufacturing that the state considers interesting, and it's got a growing track record in the state. We're, as a state, finding investments in food production and gaining the economic benefits from that. But
And to in answer to your question, David, what we as staff have been focusing on, and this will be a good process to go through to see if that should be the focus, we need to readjust it, has been food processing for two
Okay.
reasons. One, because of our agricultural industry
Sure.
up here is a supply, but also the good quality and abundant water we have up here, because most food processors are heavy water users. And then, in general, kind of light manufacturing, light industry in general, any kind of company that would be looking for that proximity to Canada, you know, and be closer, and also for Canadian companies that might be based in Kingston or Ottawa that want close access to a company on this side that gives them US access, so.
One of the things I look at there, Greg, is, you know, we've lost the paper industry when we went to the internet and all that stuff, but then you look at Amazon and the cardboard boxes going out the door on their side of the business. I mean, is that something that can be rejuvenated in this area again down the road, or? I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of cardboard.
There's an awful lot of packaging, and a lot of manufacturing creates a lot of packaging environments. So food and things like that, all sooner or later goes into a box of some kind and gets shipped to someone who uses it. So packaging is a possibility. I don't know where Amazon buys their boxes, but I suppose we can at least get some idea about that.
And there may be some unique, niche products within that industry. For example, we just, PCA, Packaging Corporation, which was on Old Rome State Road, they just closed and vacated and consolidated operations in Syracuse the end of this past year, because of sort of competition abroad for that particular product, which is kind of simple cardboard
It
boxes.
seems to be this mail order business is like Chewy, the animal side of things. I mean, now there's boxes there's Amazon, everybody is moving towards order stuff online anymore.
They are. You know, when you look at retailing in our community, it's suddenly taking a hit. Walmart's worried.
Yeah.
and is being forced to respond to Amazon and other online retailers the same way. So we are watching, I think, a sea state change in the way retailing works in this country, and nobody's quite sure what it's gonna look like in the future. So what I'm really looking at, that one employment number, I used employment, by the way, rather than unemployment. I hate unemployment as a measure, because it's got two independent variables that can cause it to change. So you can make unemployment go down by either helping people find more jobs or by convincing them to quit looking. Either one makes the number go down. So if you're the incumbent and unemployment drops, then you tell everyone, look, my policies are working. And if you were the political competitor before the next election, you say, no, your policies are so bad, everyone gave up in despair and quit looking for a job. Either one will produce the same effect on the measure. Employment only has one independent variable. So I think it's a measure that I prefer. When I compared our employment over that time period to the state as a whole, and then did a really simple correlation, about 75% of our changes in employment are not caused by anything that happens here. They're affected by the same things that affect the state as a whole. So state and national economic issues. So the question then becomes, so what's the remaining 25% of the change caused by? Some of it's certainly caused by Fort Drum. Some of it I'm not sure what's causing it. We are not New York State, but I'm not sure what's driving our engines all the time. So anyway, this is, I appreciate all the comments. If people have other thoughts that you want to share, I would say just send me an email. And I have some other. The other thing that we haven't talked about, I used employment as the primary measure of an economic impact, but there are potentially others. So if you think there are other things besides how many jobs that it creates, that an industry needs to be looked at on that behalf, please let me know.
Greg, one question. When we talk about population shifts, and besides, some of the, more obvious things I think that come to mind, but is there any, would be any benefit from trying to understand, and if you're losing population, then that means somebody has to be gaining population. I mean, I think that's kind of how it works. And if somebody else is gaining population, why are they gaining population? And what are the differences that would, cause that to happen besides climate, for example? I mean, is there anything to be gained from looking at that?
It's a really good question. Typically, I always tell my students and consulting clients, numbers like we're looking at here tell us what's happening. They don't always tell us why it's happening. That requires a very different kind of research. We can certainly track people coming and going. The IRS now makes some data available that basically tells you people who have relocated from one county to another, one zip code to another, based on where you file your tax returns from. It doesn't tell you why they moved. So you can use it. I think the Times has run some articles where they've talked about people, leaving Jefferson County for Onondaga or leaving the state or something like that. Our county gets a little tangled up because a lot of Fort Drum numbers get into that mix, and so you wind up having to try and build some filters for that. But as for why they're moving, we're not always sure. Generally, the other thing that causes populations to change is death rates, what's called natural change, deaths over births. We are an aging population, with the exception of Fort Drum, which is this constantly renewed source of young people who are, for the most part, right in the middle of their childbearing years. And they make they move a lot, but typically that decision isn't theirs. The Army decides they need to work someplace else. So it's a good question. It's a tough one to answer. I'll do what I can.
You using Facebook for your information?
Yeah, I got a contract with some guys. in
Gartner
Cambridge.
Analytics?
Cambridge.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, thanks.
Counselor, anything for
Nope.
LDC? New
Just-
business?
Just a quick question, coming back to strategic planning. What's the timeline? Do you want to just give us a big overview of how this moves forward?
Well, I don't know, I think we, as I said, we may want to try to adjust this based on what we find out about, I mean, I'm assuming we want Don to be part of this process.
Yeah.
So, he started rehab this week, as we mentioned earlier. He doesn't know yet when they will give him the okay to start. I imagine next, in a week or so, we may see him coming in for like an hour, just kind of grab some stuff or whatever, but I think we can proceed on doing all this background stuff, working with Greg on that, and we'll play it by ear. We should know, I would think by the next meeting, where he's at in terms of coming back, and I imagine by the next meeting, we may even start seeing him perhaps a couple hours a week, whatever.
So we're probably into June.
I think so, yeah.
Sounds good.
If that works for all of you.
June, July. So I figured.
Less busy months.
Anything else for the LDC board?
That's it.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes. Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?